Okay, welcome back to the Press Box Podcast. This is episode number 102 of the Press Box Podcast, our weekly college football recap. Today, we're going to discuss week number 8 in the college football season. Not really a lot of marquee games. We had Tennessee and Alabama. We had Notre Dame and Southern Cal. We had a few other games that were kind of interesting in their turnout, but not a lot of marquee games. Next week, week 9, will be the marquee matchups of some undefeated teams, as number 1 ranked Georgia is back in action, and number 6 undefeated Michigan will play number 8 Michigan State. But that's next week. This week, we're going to talk about week 8 and analyze it with you. Nathan, our producer, and I will be on the podcast, as well as our special guest, Uncle Joe, will be joining us again to discuss his views on and bring us some a humorous side to the college football season so far. Hey, remember to hit us up on Twitter at PressBoxPod is our Twitter account. At PressBoxPod is our Instagram handle, and then, of course, the PressBox channel as well. So without further ado, it's time for the PressBox Podcast. Okay, welcome back to the Press Box Podcast. This is your co-host, Ralph Miranda. I'll be joined by my producer, Nathan Miranda, as usual. We have a special guest for you today. He's been on a few podcasts before. We like to refer to him as Uncle Joe for 2 reasons. 1, because it sounds good, and 2, because he really is our Uncle Joe. So Uncle Joe, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good. I can't believe we're already through 8 weeks of college football. It seems like just yesterday we started it, but yeah, it really does. I mean, gosh, it's already Monday will be November 1st next Monday. So we're getting close. And as I said, we like to start each podcast by going over the Associated Press top 25. As I've said every week now for the past 4 or 5, the college football rankings, the playoff rankings, will come out. I found out they will be released on Tuesday, November 2nd. So that would be a week from tomorrow. We're recording this on a Monday. So after next week's games, we will have our first college football playoff ranking. Now, the reason I bring that up is the Associated Press are sports writers. So you've got Eastern sports writers, West and Southern, so forth. Their rankings sometimes tend to be influenced by regional bias. But the College Football Playoff Committee supposedly is made up of a group of people who are, some football-related people, some not football-related people. But that'll give us a truer picture of who really has a shot at getting in the playoffs. So let's start by going over our Associated Press AP Top 25. Georgia is still the unanimous number 1 team in the country. They got all 63 first-place votes again.
Woo-hoo!
They were, yeah. Uncle Joe is a former player at the University of Georgia, so that's why he sent out that woohoo. But he's also a graduate of the University of Tennessee, so he likes the Vols and follows them as well. But Georgia,
I got one woohoo and one oh no.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Tennessee gave Alabama a pretty good fight. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So Georgia is number 1 as they've been for quite some time. Excuse me. Cincinnati remained at number 2. They had a scare against Navy. Navy scored to make it 27-20. Cincinnati got the onside kick with about a minute left, and then threw an interception, which pretty much ended that game. So we'll have to be on the upset watch for Cincinnati as they have to play SMU in the next coming weeks. And SMU is a pretty solid football team. In fact, they're ranked 19th right now, and they are undefeated as well. So that'll be an interesting game. This is interesting here. You know, we've talked about Southeastern Conference bias. Alabama was ranked number 4 coming into the week. They jumped Oklahoma to go to number 3 now. Oklahoma struggled a bit with Kansas. Alabama blew out Tennessee, but that blowout is a little bit deceiving. It was 31-24 Alabama with about 12 minutes left in the game. So Tennessee held their own against Alabama, and then they just kind of ran out of gas, and Alabama put up 3 late touchdowns to pull away on that one. So Alabama's number 3, Oklahoma's number 4. Ohio State remains at number 5 at 6-1. Michigan is 6 at 7-0. Oregon has moved up to number 7. Michigan State is 8 at 7-0. Iowa is number 9. Ole Miss is 10. Notre Dame has moved up 2 spots to 11. They are 6-1. Kentucky 6-1 at 12. Wake Forest undefeated at 13th. Texas A&M at 14 at 6-2. Oklahoma State, by virtue of their loss over the weekend, are now 6-1 at number 15. Baylor is 6-1 at 16. Pitt, by beating Clemson, moved up to number 17. Auburn is 18. SMU, undefeated, as I mentioned, is 19. Penn State dropped all the way to 20th. Their loss to Illinois in 9 overtimes. They're 5-2. San Diego State is 21st. Iowa State 22. University of Texas San Antonio 23. Coastal Carolina, by virtue of their loss, had the bubble burst on their undefeated season, 24th, and Brigham Young at 25. So that's your top 25. Let's look at the scores from the week. As we said, not a whole lot of great football games, but Uncle Joe, did you watch any particular games over the weekend, or just bits and pieces of games?
Well, it's interesting. I had a DirecTV issue this weekend.
Okay.
So I had to spend about an hour or more during the weekend trying to fix the TV to get it to come on, but I couldn't do it till Football Sunday. So
right.
I'm watching the games, but I listened to some on Sirius.
Okay, so you basically took a step back into the 70s and listened to the games on the radio.
Seems to go with the name Uncle Joe, right?
That's right. Oh boy. Yeah. So as I said, not a whole lot of tremendous football games. A lot of the top-ranked teams were off. Go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, let's start with Coastal Carolina getting beat on Wednesday, because that was kind of the first game of the week.
All right.
Appalachian State beat it 30-27. Appalachian State's not ranked, obviously.
Right.
Coastal Carolina, I don't think should be ranked anymore. They're 24th now.
Right.
They shouldn't be ranked.
Right.
And I think this just goes to show what we've been talking about, that Coastal Carolina, I mean, should they've ever really been ranked? I mean, I know the only team they really beat was Kansas,
right?
Who you could argue that they should even deserve to be in the FBS,
right,
or in the Power 5, whatever you want to say. I mean, I'm just saying, like, this just kind of goes to show. Like, can you imagine one of these undefeated teams prior to this week? Because they were undefeated at Coastal Carolina. Can you imagine one of those other undefeated teams losing to Appalachian State? I don't know. It's hard to imagine. You know what I mean?
Well, we talked about that. I mean, Coastal Carolina was undefeated, but they really were not a threat to be a top team in the country. I mean, their schedule does not lend itself to be that. And their loss to Appalachian State kind of proves that. They did only lose by a field goal, but they did lose. So I guess the sports writers threw them a bone and ranked them 24th just for the heck of it, which that's fine.
Coastal Carolina, to me, is the Rodney Dangerfield of college football. They just don't get respect. They don't get respect.
That's right. They don't get any respect. And they'll tell you that too.
Yeah.
They will tell you that. It'd be interesting, though. Wouldn't you like to see them play Cincinnati? I mean,
I was just going to say that. I was
Yeah.
because I really don't think Cincinnati should be where they are.
I don't either. I agree with you.
I agree with you.
Against the Cincinnati fans, and Cincinnati fans, don't forget, I've got Tennessee as a team, and they're not even ranked.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. I don't think Cincinnati should be where they're at.
No, we talked about that on previous podcasts. I think Cincinnati's where they're at because, one, they were undefeated last year. They started the season, I think, ranked 8th. They did beat Notre Dame at Notre Dame, which gave them a little bit of credibility. And then other teams started losing ahead of them. So they ended up number 2. But they do have a date coming up with SMU. Let me look at Cincinnati's schedule real quickly here.
Well, they've got Tulane. The next game is Tulane on Saturday.
Correct. They play at Tulane on Saturday, which they should win. They play Tulsa on November 6th, which they should win. South Florida, which they should win. And then on November 20th, they host SMU, which will really be the key game for them coming up to see if they can continue their undefeated season.
Yeah, and then Cincinnati beat Navy 27-20, and Navy got an onside kick.
Right.
Late in the game, and then they went for a 4th down and missed it, I think.
Right.
So I mean, they just barely beat Navy.
They just barely beat Navy. That's exactly right. And Navy usually gives teams fits with their offense, but we'll see what Notre Dame plays Navy on November 6th. So we'll see how Notre Dame does with them, and that'll give us a little bit of an indication.
I would like to. It's interesting to see what Cincinnati does against Tulane, because SMU, who Cincinnati has to play coming up, beat Tulane 55-26.
Okay. All right.
So I mean, it'd be interesting to see how Cincinnati handles Tulane.
There's a real good case that Alabama should be ranked ahead of Cincinnati, even with one loss.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
That goes back to the whole thing that I talked about before: is are they ranking teams based on records and opponents? Because in that case, yes, Cincinnati should be ahead because they're undefeated. Or are they ranking teams based on just like common sense, who they think is better?
Right.
And I think they're kind of trying to walk, straddle the fence and do both.
Right.
Otherwise, because if they were basing it on who they think is actually better, just common sense wise, when Alabama lost their first game, they would just drop them to number 2.
Right.
But they didn't. So then that makes me think that they're based it on records. Then, well, if that's the case, then how come Alabama's ahead of Oklahoma, who's undefeated? See what I'm saying? Like they don't really.
Right.
I don't know.
Right. Well, I think here's an interesting philosophy or an interesting spin on it. I think, of course, we'll wait and see what the committee does when they come. I think Cincinnati will be ranked. Personally, I think what you're going to see, Nathan, is exactly what you said. I think assuming Alabama and Cincinnati win Saturday, I think when the first committee rankings come out next week, I think you will see Alabama ahead of Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati will be ranked probably 3 next week, and maybe Oklahoma might even be 3 and Cincinnati be 4. I say that to say this. I think the committee is looking at, or the sports writers and even the committee will look at it this way. There's been so much complaint by Central Florida a few years ago, Coastal Carolina last year, Cincinnati last year. I think they're finally going to say, okay, here's a team, Cincinnati. They're undefeated. They did beat Notre Dame. All right. If they beat SMU, we're going to put you in the playoff. And let's see how you do against Georgia, against Alabama, against teams like that. And let them take their beating. And then they'll be like, well, see, we told you, that's it. So I think assuming Cincinnati does not lose to SMU, they will be in the playoff. But I think they will be probably go in ranked at 3 or 4 instead of number 2.
Yeah, I agree. They're going to be in the playoff if they stay undefeated. I agree with that. I mean, yeah. What do you think the over/under is on the score if they have to play Georgia? Like, what do you think the point spread would be? Georgia favored by what? Like 50?
Gosh, I don't know.
Georgia playing who, Nathan?
Cincinnati.
Yeah, I think Georgia kicked their butts.
Yeah, they'd have to. I mean, I'm trying to look at Georgia's schedule.
Now Georgia's got to play Florida next week.
They do.
They can't take that too lightly.
No, I agree with that.
Right.
I agree with that.
You're right.
I'm just thinking here, like they beat Arkansas, who at the time was number 8. They beat them 37-0.
Right.
They beat Vanderbilt, who is an SEC team, 62-0.
Mm-hmm.
They beat Cincinnati, like they pummeled Cincinnati.
Well, I think the key is going to be, if you look at Georgia's schedule, they do play Florida this week. After that, I mean, it's pretty much nothing, right? They play Missouri, they play Tennessee, they play Charleston Southern, and they play Georgia Tech. So Florida's the key game for Georgia right now.
Who are you going to be rooting for, Uncle Joe, when Georgia plays Tennessee?
Yeah, that's always a difficult one. It's always a difficult one. But right now it's an easy choice because, both teams I like, but I wouldn't want, if it was reversed as well, I wouldn't want someone's schedule just ruined, right? By losing to an unranked team late in the season.
Right.
So that's the only thing. I mean, Georgia Tech is normally always a big rivalry, but I don't think Georgia Tech's got anything to stand up against Georgia this year.
No, they don't. I mean, Georgia's defense is absolutely phenomenal.
Tennessee could maybe, the way they played Alabama, they could maybe give them a fight for like 2 quarters, maybe.
Well, it's possible. I mean, it's possible. I mean, let's look real quick. We did this last week. Let's look at the SEC rankings. I mean, if Georgia beats Florida, they're going to win the East. It's a given. In fact, they'll win the East even if they don't beat Florida because Kentucky's the only other team with 1 loss and Georgia's beaten them. So Georgia's a shoe-in for the SEC championship game. But let's look at the Western side. You got Alabama is 4-1. Ole Miss is 3-1. Auburn is 2-1. So Alabama's already beaten Ole Miss, but they still have to play Auburn. So it's very possible that if Alabama gets upset by Auburn, Ole Miss could be the representative from the West. So Georgia may have, you can call it what you want, but an easier road to an undefeated season because I think Alabama would be the toughest test Georgia would play if they have to play in the SEC championship game.
Yeah, I agree.
But we'll see. Alabama has to play Auburn in the Iron Bowl, so that's going to be obviously a key matchup for both teams, especially for Alabama. Other games, I think the reason Alabama jumped Oklahoma has struggled all year long. I mean, they have not beaten anybody convincingly. They struggled with Kansas. They were losing to Kansas at halftime. They ended up beating them by 12, but they struggled mightily.
I find it hard to believe they're going to end the season undefeated.
I think
they're going to lose to somebody.
I think so too, and I think Oklahoma State might beat them. I mean, Oklahoma State did lose to Iowa State, but I think they could beat Oklahoma as well. Let's see if there's any other games here of note before we get to the Notre Dame game. Michigan took care of business. How about the Illinois-Penn State game? I mean, that was an interesting game. 9 overtimes, which, of course, let me set this up by saying that the NCAA changed the overtime rule beginning this year, where the first overtime, both teams start from the 25, and if you score a touchdown, you can choose to either go for 2 or kick an extra point. The second overtime, again, both teams start from the 25. But now, if you score a touchdown in the second overtime, you have to go for 2. All right. Then starting with the third overtime and going forward from there, they've changed the rule now where basically you just alternate 2-point conversions. So instead of putting the ball on the 25 and driving it and either settling for a field goal or a touchdown, both teams get the ball on the 3-yard line and you're basically going for 2. So that's why there were 9 overtimes. And for the first, I guess, for 3 through 8, they both got their 2-point conversion or both missed them. And then in overtime number 9, Penn State missed theirs and Illinois got theirs to win 20-18, effectively ending Penn State's any little bit of a hopes they had of possibly getting
they
in.
were 7th. So, I guess they could have maybe got in, but no, they definitely won't.
No, they definitely won't.
Where did they drop them to? Do you remember?
Penn State is now number 20.
Yeah, they probably should have dropped out of the top 25 too.
Probably
if you lose an unranked team and you're not in the no matter where you are, really, I think you should be dropped out of the top 25.
Right. No, I agree with that. I don't disagree with that at all. So that was kind of a shocker. Ole Miss beat LSU, which, neither here nor there. They were retiring Eli Manning's jersey number there that day, which, again, neither here nor there. Let's talk about Tennessee, Alabama first. I mean, that was a really good football game. Tennessee went ahead. Alabama scored first to go up 7-0. Tennessee scored 2 touchdowns, went up 14-7. Alabama tied it, then went ahead 21-14. Tennessee hung in that ball game, like I said, up to about 12 minutes left in the game. And then, of course, just ran out of gas because they just don't have the athletes to compete with Alabama. But we talked about this last week, Joe. Tennessee has been in every game they've played. And their offense is one of the best in the country. They run a very fast-paced offense. They're a very efficient offense. Their defense lacks a little bit only because they don't have the talent across the board. But Tennessee looks pretty good right now. I mean, I think
they're a better team than their record.
Right.
And I think they've been improving each game too.
Right.
But yeah, they don't have the talent and they don't have necessarily the caliber of a coach as these top teams do.
Right. I agree with that. And Nathan and I were talking last night. The Tennessee fans need to embrace this coach and embrace what they're trying to do, because we were talking last night about, okay, let's say Tennessee finishes 6-6 this year, which they probably will. I mean, I think they'll lose to Georgia. I think they'll lose Kentucky. We don't know, but they're going to either be 6-6 or 7-5. They're going to go to a bowl game. Now, next year they open their season with Ball State, at Pittsburgh, and Akron. Now, they're going to beat Ball State and Akron. They may or may not beat Pitt, but let's say they beat Pitt or lose to Pitt. Doesn't matter. 3-0, 2-1. Let's say that then they play Florida and then they play Alabama. So if they lose those games, I can see right now the Tennessee fan base starting to say, oh, here we go again. This is not the right coach, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's just the Tennessee fan base. I think you have a lot of teams that do the same thing, right? Especially starved for seasons that they, and yesteryear.
Right.
But, you got to give him a few years. And if he can't produce and can't improve each year, 1 year after the other, then there is something wrong with the coach.
I think Lane Kiffin kind of ruined or damaged Tennessee fans too with the way he left. I think they have a poor recent history of coaches, I think, which doesn't help.
Also, Tennessee has a really poor history on losing some quality players that they're recruiting.
Right.
Yeah.
I was watching something the other day on how many decent quarterbacks they've let slip through slip through their fingers and other players as well. So, they got to stop the hemorrhaging. I mean, they need to make sure they're getting the best talent out of Tennessee.
Right.
Right. That's
right. No, I agree with that. But I see this coach. I see this coach as kind of a stepping stone. And what I mean by that is this guy has proven that he's been able to create an offense that can score points. Okay. So that's a given. Now, if he can recruit some guys and get that defense back to where it needs to be, let's say they go 6-6 this year, 7-5 next year. Maybe his third year they get to 8-4. Maybe his fourth year they go back to 7-5, and maybe his fifth year they go to 9-3. Okay, I think then you've got the program to a point where maybe this guy goes on to another job, and now the program has been built up to the point where they can attract a top name coach
Exactly.
to take it the next step further.
Exactly.
What do you think, Nathan?
I think if Tennessee continues on this path that he has him on, I agree that they could attract a big name coach, but maybe they don't want to. After maybe if they continue on this path, then maybe he becomes a big name coach.
Could be, yeah.
Maybe he leaves for Alabama if Saban retires or something.
Could be, yeah. Could be, yeah.
I do think they could attract Tennessee's always going to have the ability, I think, to attract a top coach because it's a storied program.
Right.
It has a lot of history, rich tradition. I think.
Well, listen, everything you just said is true. And they have tremendous facilities. They have a tremendous fan base. But here's the problem for Tennessee right now. The reason why I don't think they can attract a big name coach is their fans have run so many coaches out of town. And it's not so much the fans as it is their big donors, the guys that are putting lots of money into that program. Okay. You basically ran Pruitt out, which they say he did some illegal things. Maybe he did, maybe didn't. Doesn't matter. Okay. They've run 3 or 4 coaches. So if you're a big name coach, do you want to go to Tennessee and have one bad year and all of a sudden have the people down on? Yeah. I mean, that's why they have to get some stability, 4, 5, 6 years with a coach. And then you can start attracting some other names, but you can't go through coaches like you change underwear and expect to attract big names. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
I agree. No, I agree with that. Yeah, I think they definitely need to give this guy time, no matter what happens next season.
Yeah,
all right, let's go ahead.
I was make a good joke on this, but you may want to edit it out. Ralph was just saying, you can't go through coaches like you're changing underwear. I was in there. Because if you don't leave the underwear on, you'll never get a winning streak.
Oh boy, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a very good way to say it. If you don't leave the underwear on for a while, you can never get a winning streak. I like that. Let's move on to the Notre Dame Southern Cal game. Notre Dame had a week off. So did Southern Cal, by the way. So both teams had a week off. I was impressed with Notre Dame because they made some changes on offense. They tweaked their play calling and they were able to run the ball finally pretty well. Their passing game was more efficient. Their defense played extremely well. And they won that game pretty much hands down 31-16. They did have a couple key injuries. They lost their All-American safety, Kyle Hamilton. So we'll see. He's going to be out against North Carolina this week, but he should come back after that. I think Notre Dame, if they play like they did against Southern Cal, I think they have a great chance to run the table. The remaining games are North Carolina, Navy, Virginia, Georgia Tech, and Stanford. So Notre Dame could easily be looking at 11-1 with an outside chance, depending upon what happens next week. And we'll talk about those games here in a little bit. An outside chance of possibly getting in the playoff, even though it's probably not likely.
Do you think the committee would be? You think they'd try to shy away from getting them in the playoffs? Do you think they'd try to put them in any way they can if there's a possibility? In other words, because part of me thinks they want Notre Dame in the playoff because it's a big name school. They have a huge fan base all over the country. It's going to bring in a lot of money, right? Probably.
Right.
But then part of me thinks that they might try to shy away from it because of what happened recently with Alabama and all that stuff.
It's possible. I mean, I think there has to be somewhat of a perfect storm for Notre Dame to get in.
I guess my point is I don't see them like doing everything they can to get them in.
No. That was that would have happened 40 years ago in the 70s.
It would happen with Alabama nowadays.
Right. But it's not going to happen today. No.
Let me ask you this: when we watched the Notre Dame game, it was early in the game. It might have been like 7-0 Notre Dame, or maybe not even 7-0. But they did something, and then you flip the channel and you go, I've seen enough. I feel good about Notre Dame. I said, what are you talking about? You said they sacked the guy twice,
right?
And then you felt good about the game. You felt good because they had 2 sacks. Explain that.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why I felt good, because Notre Dame took the opening kickoff and drove 70 yards, missed a field goal, but then on the next possession, they sacked the Southern Cal quarterback twice, got the ball back, drove down and scored. They ended up sacking him 5 times. I just felt like the defense was playing really well, and I just I had a good feeling about it. Let's put it that way.
Okay, that's fine. I just thought that was funny. It was after Notre Dame scored, and then you said they sacked the guy twice last year. They'll be fine. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
There's a lot of opportunity for a perfect storm to happen, though.
This is true.
Yeah,
this is true. I mean,
schedule of all those teams ranked ahead of Notre Dame and below Alabama.
Right.
There's I mean, of course, it's like all the stars lining up, but
right.
It's better. I think it's better than 50-50. That could happen.
Well, let's
all those Big Ten teams have to basically play each other, so they're going to knock each other out.
Well, let's look at Oklahoma first. They play Texas Tech, Baylor, Iowa State, and Oklahoma State. I think there could be a loss in there very easily. Okay, let's look at Ohio State. Ohio State has to play.
Penn State could beat them.
They could lose to Penn State. Yeah. They could lose to Michigan State. They could lose to Michigan. Okay, so there's a possibility for another loss there. Michigan has to play Michigan State this weekend. One of those teams is going to lose.
And remember, if they don't, right, and Ohio State could even beat a Michigan or Michigan State, no matter who comes out of that one. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity for that to happen.
Right.
Yeah, well, like you were saying, let's say Ohio State loses to Penn State.
Right.
And then Michigan beats Michigan State.
Right.
And then Ohio State beats Michigan. Then they're all 3 knocked out.
That's right. Which
so
could happen.
Yeah.
Oregon would be the only team that I think might be a little bit of a. They play Colorado, Washington State, Utah, and Oregon State. Utah may be the game at Utah would be the game maybe where they could slip up and lose their second game. Iowa has already lost a game.
I don't see them losing again. Iowa probably, right? So
Iowa plays at Wisconsin, at Northwestern, Minnesota, Illinois, Nebraska. So probably not, but possible. Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, I say that to say that there's still an outside chance, especially if Cincinnati gets beat by SMU. Of course, then you'd have a 1-loss Cincinnati and a 1-loss Notre Dame. And I could see the outrage if they put Notre Dame in over Cincinnati.
Yeah, I know. But the more I look at this, though,
But the payday would be tremendously more with Notre Dame than Cincinnati.
Yes, it would. Yeah.
Man, I think money at the end of the day, money is gonna be what they go with, I think.
Well, and money
will talk, Cincinnati will walk.
Right. Thank you. That's a good way to put it. Let's look at another thing that we've overlooked. Alabama's sitting there with 1 loss. Okay. They have to play Auburn. All right. No guarantee they're going to beat Auburn. We've seen Alabama struggle this year. And then they'll probably have to play Georgia. So another loss by Alabama knocks them out, right? 2 losses.
Yeah, I don't know too. Like I'm looking at Iowa and Ole Miss, the two that kind of. I don't know if they have to really play anybody else that they could lose to, and they have 1 loss.
Yeah, we already.
Well, no, Ole Miss plays Texas A&M. They could lose to Texas A&M,
and they've got to play at Auburn this week. Okay,
I missed that one. So okay, so they have a lot of chances.
And Texas A&M. So that's 2 opportunities there for Auburn, for Ole Miss to lose.
Yeah, it's actually I think like Uncle Joe said, I think it's better than 50-50.
Right. I mean, I think so too. I mean, I think the only team, Nathan and I talked about this last week. I think the only team right now that's guaranteed in, as close to guaranteed as possible, is Georgia.
Yeah.
Okay. And really, if they beat Florida this week, they're in. Because even if they lose the SEC championship game, you're not going to drop them from 1 to 5. Okay. So they're in. I think if they beat,
especially if they lose to Alabama, and Alabama's in the top 4.
Yes.
And I think what we're going to see, as you mentioned earlier, Ralph, I think you're going to see next week when the polls come out, the rankings, that Alabama will swap with Cincinnati.
Right. I agree. Yeah.
And that's to cushion Alabama against 1 more loss.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
And they're expecting that to be either protecting Alabama or Georgia against the SEC championship game, because somebody will lose.
Right. Right.
And they want that game to be 1 versus 2, I bet.
That's what they want that game to be. Right. Exactly. Because that could end up, right, in after the playoffs being the national championship game.
Right. I agree. And I think what the committee is going to look at is, especially if Georgia beats Florida this week, I think Cincinnati at the best is going to end up number 4. And they're going to say your reward for getting in is you're going to have to play Georgia in the semifinal. And then good luck with that. So we'll see what happens. Let's go quickly over the games that are going to be coming up this week. We've already touched on a few of them. Notre Dame hosts North Carolina. That should be a win for Notre Dame, assuming they can keep playing well. Iowa's at Wisconsin. Cincinnati plays Tulane. Texas is at Baylor. Michigan State is going to be the game of the week, number 6 against number 8, both undefeated. Iowa State's at West Virginia. Texas Tech is at Oklahoma. Georgia, Florida will be the second big game of the week, number 1 at Florida. Duke and Wake Forest, and Ole Miss and Auburn. That'll clear up a lot of things there. Kentucky's at Mississippi State. We'll find out exactly how good Kentucky is. Penn State's at Ohio State. Big game for Ohio State. Not so big for Penn State, but they certainly could wreck Ohio State's chances. And again, let's look real quickly. I want to look at the standings in the Big Ten because that's going to also, they have a conference championship game as well. If you look at the Big Ten right now, Michigan State, and Ohio State are all in the East Division. They're all undefeated in the conference. They all have to play each other. So one of those teams is going to be the representative, and probably all of them could have one loss. One of them could be undefeated. We'll see how that plays itself out. In the Western Division, Iowa looks to be the team to win that one. Minnesota's 3-1 in the conference as well. Iowa has to play Minnesota. So my point being is that you could see Iowa against Michigan State, or Ohio State for the Big Ten championship, and that could throw another wrench in the whole playoff rankings as well.
Yeah. I mean, that'd be a big game. I think the game I'm most looking forward to, though, next week is the Michigan State game.
Yeah, I think so.
They're both undefeated, and I guess you could look at it from the standpoint of, well, it's not that big of a game because one of them's they're 6 and 8, so they're pretty closely ranked. One of them's going to lose, so the result's going to be the same no matter what happens, kind of.
Right.
I mean, but I'm just kind of interested to see what happens. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a key game. I really do. Very key game, and I think Michigan. Let's say Michigan wins. I mean, they haven't beaten Ohio State in I don't know how long, so that's going to set up that big game at the end of the season. I think Penn State, Ohio State's a big game. I think Penn State has a lot to prove, and they may come out a lot looser than they would have had they been undefeated or had one loss. So we'll see what happens.
I think Texas Tech could beat Oklahoma, maybe.
I think they could. Yeah, I think
so
they could.
That could end that whole thing.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And next week, what we'll do is we'll have our podcast after the rankings come out. That way, we can talk very knowledgeably about. You
can talk very knowledgeably. I can talk about it.
Well, we can all talk about it. I mean, that's just the way it is. So, any final thoughts, Uncle Joe, on what we've talked about today?
No, just summed it up. It's going to be an exciting rest of the season. There's good games coming up. There's a lot of chance for the whole rankings to be kind of muddled up to see who's going to get to the playoffs. Even though like we said, I believe it should be still Georgia for sure, and possibly in Alabama, but you never know. I mean, everyone's gunning for Georgia, everyone's gunning for Alabama. It's not an easy road, even if the team is unranked.
That's true. That's a good point. When you're number 1 or 2 or 3 or something like that, no matter who you're playing, that's like their biggest game of the year. So they're always going to try to beat you.
No question about that. And I really don't believe if you're sitting here and asking me to make a prediction right now, and looking at the top 25, let me look at it one more time. I don't think that Michigan and Michigan State will both end up undefeated. I think there's going to be some carnage in that Big Ten with all those teams playing each other.
They play each other, Michigan.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is I think they're going to be out of it. I think Oklahoma is going to lose a game. So what I'm saying right now is I really think that the only 2 undefeated teams possibly at the end of the season are going to be Georgia and Cincinnati. If Cincinnati beats SMU. Now, if they lose to SMU, then you're going to have an undefeated Georgia and a bunch of teams with 1 loss. So now you're going to really get some discussion about which three of those teams are valid teams to be in the playoff.
Hey, Wake Forest is undefeated. Don't forget that.
Yeah, but Wake Forest is, they're not.
Yeah,
gonna be-
Yeah, at least after next week we'll have the actual college football playoff rankings,
Right.
And we can go from there.
Right, and that's really all that matters. So, Uncle Joe, we appreciate you joining us. We've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Me too. I love your podcast. Keep it up. Good work.
We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We'll have you on again, and make sure you hit us up on Twitter at PressBoxPod is our Twitter account. Nathan's been putting up some polls on there, lots of retweets. Make sure you check that out. At PressBoxPod is also our Instagram handle, and then of course the PressBox Podcast YouTube channel, where we have full episodes as well as some key segments from some other episodes as well. So for Uncle Joe, for our producer Nathan, I'm Ralph Miranda. It's been an exciting week in college football. Next week will be even more exciting as we get closer and closer to the college football playoffs. So we'll see you again next time on the PressBox Podcast.